All right, everyone. There's been a lot of confusion as to how to create your models in lesson 2.3, activity 3. For lesson 2.3, activity 3, you are supposed to create a model to represent claim 1 in chapter 2 and claim 2 in chapter 2. When looking at our two claims, claim 1 says, okay, the thruster force on all the pods was the same. However, it did behave differently. It moved in the opposite direction. In claim number 2, the thruster force still the same on all pods. However, this time it only slowed down. It did not stop. These are the two models that we need to make. That's what scientists do. They make models to communicate their thoughts in picture form. So when looking at our model here, my model is set up showing claim number 1. So I'm trying to create a model that represents my space pod coming into the space station with the same velocity as normal, having the thrusters fire in the opposite direction with the same force as normal. However, due to the mass of the object, the space pod ended up going in the opposite direction. We encouraged you to use the simulation to kind of demonstrate this. So when I'm looking at the situation right here, I have 3 different space pods. Space pod A is representing a space pod that had less asteroids than normal. Therefore, the mass was less. Space pod B is our normal space pod. And space pod C, they collected a lot of asteroids. And as a result, they have more mass than normal. I'm going to go ahead and click prepare force. And I'm going to click the same 4 right arrows on all 4 pods. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So for claim number 1, to remind you, claim number 1, we're looking for the object that goes in the opposite direction as normal right away. Let's take a look. Notice B stayed where it was supposed to be. That's what normally happens. But when we watch that video, we see that A ended up going in the opposite direction. Looking at the mass of object A, we know that the mass of object A was less than normal. That's what I'm trying to model. So normally, our space pod comes in with this normal velocity. Our space pod thrusters fire in the opposite direction, and our space pod stops. But as we just saw in our model, in this example, when the object goes in the opposite direction, we need to have a lighter mass. So I'm going to drag out a lighter mass space pod. It's coming into the space station with the same velocity as normal. Now my space pod has the thrusters firing in the opposite direction like normal. However, this time my lighter space pod is going in the opposite direction. So we're going to tack on a velocity showing my space pod going backwards to the left. Now, because it simply is going a little bit slower than normal, I'm choosing a velocity that's a little bit slower. Once you've fixed your model to match this, please click Update or Hand In. Now, model number 2, claim number 2 over here on the left. Now we're looking at a model that's representing our space pod that only slowed down. It did not stop. So let's go back and watch this video again. When we click play on this model, we notice that C is still going in the same direction as normal. However, it just slowed down. We know that object C has a greater mass than normal. That's what our model needs to represent. So again, this top part is just showing normal. My space pod coming into the space station with a normal mass at a normal velocity. The space pod thrusters firing in the opposite direction like normal, and like normal, it stops. But in model number 2, claim number 2, I want to show it slowing down. So in my model, I know I'm going to have a more massive space pod. Still coming into the space station with the same velocity. My massive space pod still has the thrusters firing the opposite direction. My massive space pod, however, just slows down. It's still traveling in the same direction as it was before, just slower. So I'm going to drag those velocity arrows that show my space pod still traveling to the right, just at a slower velocity. Please update your model or complete your model for claim number 2, then click hand in again or update.